I was actually going to talk a little bit about China, and I will get to Korea. But first thing I want to say is China's great accomplishments. This is the greatest people's success story in modern human history. And I want to emphasize that China liberated itself. It achieved developed status. It is only one of four formerly colonized countries or regions to achieve this status. Almost every country that was colonized has not managed to achieve a developed status. They've all stayed in a kind of neo-colonial, underdeveloped status. And China did this without slavery, without colonization, without war, without invasion, without primitive accumulation. In other words, it developed on its own terms. It also tackled some extreme crises. 850 million people were brought out of poverty. In the 1980s, China was poorer than Haiti by GDP. And most people don't know this, but it ended the worst drug addiction problem on the planet. In 1949, 90 million people were addicted to opiates. That was about 1/5 of its population. And within 3 years, it got rid of the drug addiction problem. It's currently tackling global warming by creating a revolution in sustainable energy transition. In fact, what we're seeing is the greatest sustainable energy generation transition project on the planet. And it is offering renewables as an affordable global good. It has the greatest carbon capture project on the planet. Namely, it builds forest the size of Belgium every single year. And it's constantly developing new technologies such as molten salt reactors, plasma fusion generation. It's on the cutting edge of that, and nanotechnologies such as reclaiming lithium from seawater for the sustainable reclaiming of lithium. And of course, it's a scientific and economic powerhouse. The top scientific research publication comes out of China. ASPI, China hostile think tank, says that 57 out of 63 critical cutting edge technologies are currently being led by the Chinese. And of course, it's a tech powerhouse. It's maintained technological information sovereignty despite sanctions, despite technological sanctions. And recently, it released DeepSeek AI R1. It developed it at probably 100th or 1,000th of the development costs and 1/11th of the training costs. And it's released it as open source, which means that this is AI for everyone. It's opening up the knowledge commons as opposed to enclosing them, which is what you see with the US corporations. And all of this is a common benefit. But then you hear the refrain, at what cost? And of course, you also hear, but is it really socialist? And this is the kind of purity fetishism socialism. So I thought I would tackle that a little bit. There's a has-is fallacy. I have something, therefore I am something is a fallacy. I have a dog, therefore I am a dog is a fallacy. The US has socialists, therefore it is socialist is a fallacy. You cannot say China has capitalists, therefore it is capitalist. But people harp on this all the time. If you really want to think about it, you have to ask yourself, has or does any capitalist state have long-term planned economic development for common prosperity? Does any capitalist state have public ownership of land, infrastructure, public goods, the commanding heights of economy, and 60 to 70% of all corporations? Has any capitalist state avoided transitioning to a financialized rentier economy as it becomes monopolistic? Has any capitalist state avoided the capitalist burn and crash cycle of repeated recession? Has any capitalist state virtually eliminated hunger, poverty, illiteracy? Or does it use poverty to create wealth? Has any capitalist committed to ecological and sustainable development, writing that into its constitution? And has any capitalist state implemented a scientific approach to development using trial spots? The answer to all of the above is no. Therefore, China is not capitalist. still people insist, they say China is imperialist, and Sanika gave a really, really good refutation of that, but I'll just kind of unpack a little bit of the genealogy of this. The people who claim China imperialist are like the people who shout reverse racism. That is, anything opposed to imperialism can only be from other imperialists, just as a challenge to racism must be racist at its foundation. So imperialists, they knee-jerk about reverse imperialism, China imperialist. That's the trope that you will hear from them. And it's like people who say all lives matter, all imperialisms matter, even the ones that they imagine. And they cannot comprehend that escaping from American imperial violence should not be seen as an imperial threat, just as somebody who escapes from the police is not endangering the police. But this knee-jerk trope was given academic formulation by a US-funded anti-China scholar. His name is Ho-Fung Hang, and he was working out of the deep state think tank SAIS at Johns Hopkins. He had illustrious genocidal colleagues like John Negroponte, Elliot Cohen, Madeleine Albright, and he published his work in Foreign Policy, and then it trickled out into dollar store lefty outlets like Jacobin, and then it circulated as low-rent tokens in the democratic socialist left and ultra-left and liberal circles. And then it was reappropriated by right-wing think tanks. It's pure propaganda. There's nothing inter-imperial about this conflict because the US is taking the conflict to China, and China is not imperialist, as others have pointed out clearly. The core fallacy, to boil it down to its simplest terms, is that imperialism and colonialism underdevelops the periphery. It impoverishes the periphery, which is exactly the opposite of what BRI and the indigenous sovereign development towards a counter-hegemonic world of multipolarity is doing. So when people use that fallacy, they're doing the work of the imperialists. And then we also always get these kind of ad hominem attacks. They say tanky, and tanky simply means my mental gas tank is depleted, words and logic have failed me, all I can muster is invective. And there's a taxonomy. If we wanted to, play the ad hominem game, there are crankies, stankies, wankies, twankies, skankies, and shankies. I won't go into all of them, but crankies are the ones that are really cranky and cantankerous. Wankies are white authoritarian crankies. Twinkies are obsessed with Taiwan province, and they believe in twin imperialism. Skankies want to school you, shankies want to shiv you, etc. We won't go into that. But then people also come on about, oh, what about workers' rights? And I just want to tell you a little story about my friend. He used to use a mayonnaise jar as his water bottle. And this hipster San Francisco dude went up to him and said, I hope you recycle that jar. And his head exploded because he has been using that mayonnaise jar as his water bottle for about 7 years. And he's never had to recycle it because he's never thrown it away. But this is the way that idiots think. They don't understand that if you have a people's republic, it builds wealth for its people, including its workers. And just one benchmark is Chinese manufacturing wages have risen 130-fold in 45 years versus 4 times. In other words, we're focusing on performance and outcomes, not a reified, mystified process that fetishizes institutions or some notion of, process. You have in China what's called a whole process democracy that lifts up the bottom for everybody and creates common collective wealth. So I compare it to the way that voting is fetishized in the West. But just to look at the numbers, China's average wages have increased 12-fold since 2000. They've increased 250-fold, 24,000% since the 1950s. Manufacturing wages have nearly doubled in the past 10 years. They have increased tenfold since 2000, and they have increased over 130-fold since 1980, 12,000%, as opposed to US wages, which have, essentially quadrupled since 1980. I will take 12,000% over 300% any time of the day or night. Same thing for minimum wage. US federal minimum wage has flatlined since 2007, has not increased in purchasing value since 1980, whereas in China, since 2006, almost the same period, it's increased 250%. And of course, China is the longest post-retirement life expectancy, between 18 to 28 years. Blue-collar women workers can retire at 50, men can retire at 55, and others retire between 60 and 63. So the life expectancy increases at the same time that people can expect to have a post-work retirement. So this is extraordinary, and these are things that are accomplished without the kind of without the US fetishization. So it's far better to be a worker in China than in the United States. And salaries and public wealth makes life in China much, much more livable. 70% of Chinese millennials own their own home, twice the rate of the US, and between 90 and 96% of Chinese households own their own home, usually without owning a penny. But we are in a kind of a full-on preparation for war. And in information war, the idea is to create a no-think zone or a no critical thinking zone, just as in real war, you have a no-fly zone. And so we're very, very accelerated in that process. And of course, you also see desperation in the empire. South Korea recently just saw an attempted military coup. And this is one of a string of attempted coups across the world. In Bulgaria, Hungary, Bangladesh, even France had an election. And then the ruling party refused to give up power after losing the election. And you see attempts to revert to dictatorships. You see this in Taiwan. You see this in the Philippines. You see this in Korea. And in particular, Korea is very important because Korea has 500,000 active duty troops and 3.1 million reserve troops. And all of these troops fall under US control the moment the US declares DEFCON 3 under conditions of war. Now, South Korea's recent attempt at martial law, i.e. a military coup, was predicated on creating the semblance of an attack from North Korea, a false flag attack from North Korea, and then creating kinetic engagement. And therefore, South Korea would have had a military dictatorship. It would have had a war with North Korea. And under those conditions, all of South Korea's troops would have fallen under US operational control, with which the US could have waged war against China, or it could have sent those troops to Ukraine to fight against, quote unquote, the North Koreans who are fighting for Russia, but who are more elusive than the aliens at Roswell. In fact, it's just a complete canard that they've manufactured. And this explains why you have this lie. So anyway, we're in a very, very dangerous situation. We have to stay in solidarity with and for China. The future of the world depends on it. And part of that is fighting the lies, fighting the information war, and decolonizing your mind, not letting your mind become occupied, because the US military considers mental space a battle, a theater of contestation. Do not let your mind be occupied with anti-China propaganda. Thank you, everybody.